At 32, Emily Carter buried her father and learned he'd left everything to her stepmother. Hurt and nearly broke, she paid just $100 for his rotting fishing cabin on a frozen Minnesota lake, the one thing nobody wanted. Her stepmother called it worthless, and even the locals thought she'd bought herself a problem. Then, during a brutal winter storm, Emily's dog Scout began clawing beneath the old boathouse. What he uncovered there would change everything Emily believed about her father and the mother she thought had abandoned her. But before we see what Scout found, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Comment below. Have a wonderful day, and subscribe for more stories like this. The snow had begun before dawn on the morning they read Daniel Carter's will. Fine white grains sweeping across Pine Hollow and gathering in the corners of the courthouse parking lot. Emily Carter sat in her car for almost a minute after turning off the engine, watching the snow erase her tire tracks. She was 32 years old, and she had spent most of the previous week telling herself that her father's death had not changed much. They had already become strangers in all the ways that mattered. But Daniel had called her 3 days before he died. Emily had been working late at the warehouse in Minneapolis when his name appeared on her phone. She had stared at it, still angry after their last argument, and let it ring. He left no message. Now there would never be another call. Scout shifted in the back seat and pressed his nose against the glass. "I know," Emily whispered. "Let's get this over with." She left him bundled in the car with the heat running remotely and crossed the parking lot. Vanessa was already inside the attorney's office. Daniel's widow looked composed in a dark wool coat, her blonde hair pinned neatly behind her head. She had cried at the funeral, but this morning her eyes were dry. "Emily," she said. "Vanessa." They sat opposite each other while the attorney opened Daniel's file. Emily had not expected a fortune. Her father had worked hard his entire life, but he had never been wealthy. Still, as the attorney moved through the will, each sentence seemed to remove another piece of Daniel's life from her reach. The house in Pine Hollow went to Vanessa. So did his pickup truck, his savings, household possessions, and a modest investment account. Emily received several personal items Daniel had specifically named: a box of family photographs, his old fishing tackle, 2 books that had belonged to his father, and a cedar chest stored in the basement. That was all. Emily kept her hands folded in her lap. She had told herself she did not care about the money, and mostly that was true. What hurt was how deliberate it felt. Daniel had sat somewhere with a lawyer and decided where every part of his life should go. When he finished dividing it, his daughter was left with memories in boxes. Vanessa adjusted her sleeve, and Emily noticed Daniel's silver watch around her wrist. He had worn it almost every day Emily could remember. The sight hurt more than the house. Vanessa caught her looking. "Your father made his wishes very clear." Emily raised her eyes. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to." The attorney cleared his throat before either woman could continue. "There is one additional matter." He pulled a thin folder from beneath the will. "The Lake Alder property." Emily looked up. "The cabin," for the first time that morning. Vanessa showed irritation. "That place is still an issue?" The old fishing cabin stood on the northern shore of Lake Alder, well outside Pine Hollow. Daniel had taken Emily there when she was young, though less often after he married Vanessa. In Emily's memory it smelled of pine boards, lake water, and coffee simmering too long on the stove. "The title history is unclear," the attorney explained. "Daniel maintained the property and paid expenses associated with it, but I don't have a current deed establishing clear ownership in his name." Emily frowned. "Then why is it in his estate file?" "Because he treated it as property under his control. But until the title issue is resolved, I can't characterize it as a normal estate asset. Vanessa sighed. The roof leaks. The dock is half rotten, and the taxes and maintenance have been annoying us for years. I don't want it. Emily looked at the folder. Of everything discussed that morning, the cabin was the only place that still felt connected to the father she remembered, rather than the man she had spent years avoiding. She remembered Daniel teaching her to bait a hook there. She remembered falling asleep beside a wood stove while adults talked quietly in the kitchen. There were fragments she could no longer place, including memories from before Vanessa had entered their lives. What happens to it? Emily asked. Someone has to resolve the ownership, the attorney said. Vanessa can disclaim or transfer whatever interest the estate may ultimately have, but that doesn't establish that the estate actually owns the underlying property. Vanessa leaned back. Emily, if you want that headache, take it. For free, Vanessa gave a short laugh. Nothing involving that cabin has ever been free. Emily almost let it go. Then she thought of Daniel's watch on Vanessa's wrist, his house behind Vanessa's name, and the unanswered phone call sitting forever in her memory. How much Vanessa studied her for a moment. $100. The attorney immediately clarified that Emily would be purchasing only whatever transferable estate interest Vanessa could relinquish. Not guaranteed title to the property. Emily understood. It was irrational anyway. She had no need for a decaying cabin hours from Minneapolis, especially in January. Yet walking away felt like abandoning the last place where her childhood with Daniel had not been entirely complicated. She opened her wallet. Fine. Vanessa blinked. You're serious? Emily placed 5 20s on the desk. $100? Vanessa shook her head. Then you deal with whatever mess comes with it. The attorney prepared a simple agreement while snow thickened beyond the windows. By the time Emily signed, her phone showed a winter storm warning. Heavy snow and dangerous wind chills were expected across northern Minnesota by evening. She should have returned to Minneapolis immediately. Instead, she asked for the cabin file. Inside were old tax receipts, maintenance invoices, a survey map, and copies of property records. Emily searched through them twice. Where's the deed? The attorney shook his head. That's the problem. There isn't a current deed here showing Daniel as owner. A cold uneasiness moved through her that had nothing to do with the weather. Her father had used Lake Alder for decades. He had repaired the cabin, paid bills on it, kept boats there. Yet the simplest document proving it belonged to him was missing. Emily closed the folder. I'm going up there. Vanessa stared at the snow. Today I want to see what I just paid for. As Emily stood, the attorney stopped her. There's something else Daniel left with the estate materials. He opened a drawer and removed a small brass key attached to a faded wooden tag. This was stored separately. His instructions indicated it should remain with the Lake Alder file. Emily took it. The brass was dark with age. On one side of the tag, Daniel's handwriting was unmistakable. 2 words had been written in black ink. Boathouse, Lower. The road to Lake Alder narrowed until Emily could barely tell where the pavement ended and the snowbank began. She drove slowly, both hands tight on the wheel, while Scout shifted restlessly in the back seat. The storm warning on the radio had been upgraded twice since she left Pine Hollow. By mid-afternoon, the sky had turned the flat gray that came before serious Minnesota snow. Emily considered turning around more than once, but each time her fingers brushed the brass key in her coat pocket, she kept going. She wanted to see the cabin, confirm it was still standing, collect anything worth saving, and leave before dark. That plan began falling apart the moment she reached Lake Alder. Snow covered the narrow driveway almost to the bumper. The cabin appeared between the pines like something the woods had been slowly reclaiming. Its cedar siding had faded nearly gray. Snow sagged on the porch roof, and one shutter hung crooked beside a window. Beyond it, Lake Alder stretched white and silent beneath the winter sky. Emily parked close to the porch and let Scout out. He bounded into the snow, delighted by a place that looked to Emily like a collection of expensive repairs. "Best $100 I ever spent," she muttered. The front door resisted until she leaned her shoulder against it. Inside, the air was painfully cold. The cabin smelled of dust, dry wood, and the faint mineral scent of an old fireplace. Emily found the electrical panel and managed to get several lights working, though one flickered whenever the refrigerator tried to start. The propane heater clicked repeatedly before producing weak warmth. She kept her coat on. Scout explored each room while Emily checked windows and pipes. A stain spread across one corner of the ceiling. The kitchen faucet coughed brown water before clearing. A mouse had shredded paper inside a lower cabinet. Vanessa had not exaggerated about the place being a headache. Yet small details kept stopping Emily. Daniel's dented coffee pot still sat beside the stove. 2 fishing rods rested against the wall. A faded deck of cards occupied the same shelf where she remembered it from childhood. Then, beside the kitchen doorway, she saw a series of pencil marks on the wooden frame. Emily stepped closer. Heights and dates climbed the trim. Most had faded, but one remained clear enough to read. EM 8. Her fingertips touched the mark. Beside it, in different handwriting, someone had drawn a tiny crooked star. Emily knew that handwriting before. Her mind supplied the name. Laura. Her mother had been here. Of course she had. Emily knew intellectually that her parents had visited the cabin before their marriage collapsed. But knowing something and seeing evidence of it were different things. A memory surfaced without warning, a woman kneeling behind her, gathering her hair while Emily complained that a braid pulled too tightly. Sunlight on the floor, lake water glittering through an open door. Her mother laughing. Emily withdrew her hand. For years, Laura existed mostly as the woman who had left when Emily was 8. The mark on the doorway belonged to someone who had once stood close enough to measure her daughter's height. Scout barked outside, breaking the memory. Emily wiped her eyes impatiently and followed him. He was near the slope leading toward the lake. The boathouse stood below the cabin, half surrounded by wind-blown snow. Its weathered boards leaned toward the frozen shoreline, and part of its roof had been patched with mismatched shingles. Emily started downhill. "You picked a terrible day to visit," the male voice came from behind her. Emily turned sharply. A man in a heavy canvas jacket stood near the driveway, one gloved hand raised. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." "Who are you, Ben Halverson?" He nodded toward the cabin. "Daniel used to hire me when something around here needed fixing." Emily relaxed only slightly. "I'm Emily. I figured." Ben looked toward the road. "Storm's coming faster than forecast. I saw a vehicle up here and wanted to make sure nobody was planning to drive across the lake." "I'm not." "Good." He glanced at Scout, who had already approached to investigate him. "People see snowmobiles out there and assume the ice is safe everywhere. It isn't. Current runs near this shore. Thickness changes." Emily looked across the white surface. From where she stood, it appeared solid enough to support a house. "I'll stay off it, and keep him off it too." Ben scratched Scout behind one ear. Scout immediately approved of him. "Your heater working? Technically, that doesn't sound promising." "It's running. If it quits, don't wait until the cabin gets cold to decide you have a problem." Emily heard the warning without appreciating the implication that she needed looking after. "I've survived Minnesota winters before." Ben met her gaze, then nodded. "All right. Just making sure." He pointed toward the road. "I'm a few miles east. If the snow gets as bad as they're saying, that road could close tonight." After he left, Emily carried supplies from the car and tried to convince herself she would be gone within an hour, but snow was already filling her tire tracks. She returned to the boathouse before visibility worsened. The door opened with a groan. Inside were an overturned aluminum boat, old life jackets, rusted tools, and a narrow workbench. Emily removed Daniel's brass key, boathouse lower. She tried the door lock despite already knowing it made little sense. The key did not fit. She tried a padlock on a storage cabinet. Too small. An old tackle locker. Wrong shape. She crouched beside the workbench and examined its drawers. Nothing. Lower what she whispered. Scout ignored her. He had become interested in the rear corner of the boathouse. His nose moved rapidly along the floorboards. He scratched once, stopped, sniffed, then scratched again. Mouse. Scout whined. Or something equally disgusting. Emily pulled him away. He immediately returned. She checked the boards but saw nothing except old timber and frozen dirt visible through narrow gaps. With daylight disappearing and the storm worsening, she put the key away. Tomorrow. Back inside, Emily fed Scout heated canned soup and watched snow strike the windows. The lights flickered twice. She checked the heater each time. By 8, the wind was loud enough to make the cabin creak. Scout paced between the kitchen and front door. Whatever is under there can wait. Eventually, he settled beside the wood stove. Emily fell asleep on the couch under 2 blankets. Daniel's cabin file on the table beside her. She woke sometime later without knowing why. The room was dim. Wind pressed against the walls. For several seconds, she listened to the heater and tried to understand what had changed. Then she saw Scout's empty blanket. Scout. No movement. Emily stood. The front door was not fully closed. A thin line of snow had blown across the threshold. Her stomach tightened. She pulled on her boots and coat, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped into the storm. Scout. The beam caught paw prints before the wind could erase them. They led downhill, toward the lake. Emily followed, calling his name until the dark outline of the boathouse emerged through the snow. Its door stood open. Scout, for one terrible moment, there was only wind. Then a muffled bark answered her. Emily froze. It had not come from the lake. It had come from beneath her feet. She stepped inside the boathouse and aimed the flashlight at the floor. Another bark rose from somewhere under the old boards. Emily dropped to her knees and swept the flashlight across the floorboards. Scout A bark answered from beneath the rear corner, followed by frantic scratching. Near the wall, one plank had broken downward, leaving a dark opening barely wide enough for Scout to squeeze through. Emily crawled closer and aimed the light inside. Scout's eyes flashed back at her from a shallow space beneath the boathouse. "How did you even get down there?" he whined, and tried climbing toward her, but loose soil crumbled beneath his paws. Emily widened the opening by pulling at the broken board. The wood was rotten enough to splinter in her gloves. Beneath it lay frozen earth, old support beams, and a narrow crawl space descending toward the shoreline. Scout had apparently followed something under the structure until he could no longer climb out. Stay. The command was ridiculous under the circumstances, but saying it steadied her. Emily lowered herself through the opening. Her boots found packed earth. The space smelled of damp timber and mud, and the roof above her was so low she had to crouch. Scout scrambled toward her, tails striking a support post. "You scared 10 years off my life." She grabbed his collar and guided him toward the opening. He resisted, turning his head toward the far side of the crawl space. "No. Whatever you smelled is not worth freezing to death over." Emily pushed him upward until he managed to hook his front paws over the floor. She climbed after him, but Scout immediately pulled toward the boathouse doorway. Snow blew through the opening in white sheets. Emily caught his collar again. "Cabin! Now!" They stepped outside. The safest route was uphill along the bank, several yards from the lake. But Scout jerked sideways when a gust drove snow into his face. Emily lost her grip. He bounded toward the shoreline. She followed without thinking. Her first step landed on snow-covered ground. The second struck what looked identical. On the third, the surface cracked. Emily heard it before she understood it, a sharp, brittle snap beneath her right boot. Her leg plunged through. Black water swallowed her boot and climbed above her knee. She threw herself backward, elbows hitting harder ice while freezing water soaked through her jeans. Scout barked wildly. Emily dragged her leg free and rolled toward the bank. For several seconds, she could not breathe properly. The cold was not simply cold. It was pain, immediate and violent, as if her skin had been struck. "Cabin," she gasped. Scout stayed beside her now. Emily stumbled uphill, her wet pant legs stiffening in the wind. By the time she reached the porch, her hands were shaking so badly she missed the doorknob twice. Inside, she stripped off the wet boot and jeans, wrapped herself in blankets, and turned the heater higher. Her teeth began chattering uncontrollably. She tried to tell herself she was fine. Then she remembered Ben's warning if something went wrong. Do not wait until it became worse. Her phone showed one weak bar. She found the number he had given her before leaving and called. He answered on the third ring. "Emily, I went through the ice." His voice changed immediately. "How much of you?" "One leg, maybe above the knee. I got out." "Are you inside?" "Yes." "Wet clothes off." "Yes. Stay there. Keep warming gradually. I'm coming." The road. "Stay inside." The call ended. Emily hated how relieved she felt. 25 minutes later, headlights moved through the trees. Ben entered, carrying a duffel and stamped snow from his boots. He looked at Emily, wrapped beside the heater, then at the pile of wet clothing. "Any dizziness?" "No." "Confusion?" "I'm confused about why I bought this place." That's probably unrelated. Despite herself, Emily laughed once, then shivered. Ben checked her hands and asked several questions before deciding she was warming normally. He brought her a dry, insulated blanket from his truck and made her drink something warm. "You got lucky," he said. "That shoreline is exactly what I warned you about." "I know." "What happened?" Emily looked at Scout. He had positioned himself beside the heater with the innocence of an animal who had caused nothing. "He got under the boathouse." Ben frowned. "Under it, there's a crawl space. One of the floorboards broke." She expected a lecture. Instead, Ben glanced toward the dark window. "You can show me when it's daylight, not tonight," Emily nodded. She no longer felt inclined to argue. Ben stayed until the shaking eased and color returned to her foot. Before leaving, he made her promise not to go outside again until morning. "I'm serious. Emily, I promise." At the door, he paused. Daniel used to think knowing a place meant it couldn't surprise him. Emily looked at him. Did that work out? Ben gave the cabin a brief glance. Not usually. Then he disappeared into the snow. By morning, the storm had weakened. Emily woke sore but warm, with Scout sleeping against the couch. Sunlight filtered through clouds, revealing deep drifts around the cabin. She should have been thinking about getting back to Pine Hollow. Instead, she kept remembering Scout beneath the boathouse and the way he had resisted leaving. After breakfast, she dressed in dry layers and waited until full daylight before walking down the bank, deliberately staying far from the lake edge. Scout remained on a leash. Inside the boathouse, she found the broken floorboard. In daylight, she noticed something she had missed during the storm. Scout had not merely fallen through rotten wood along the rear wall. Fresh scratches marked the frozen soil where he had been digging. What were you after? Emily crouched and moved loose dirt aside with a small shovel from the workbench. Beneath it was another board, but this one looked different. It had been cut deliberately and fitted between the joists. Near one end lay a recessed iron ring. Emily's pulse quickened. She pulled. The panel lifted several inches before catching against packed dirt. After clearing the edges, she raised it fully. Beneath was a narrow compartment lined with old boards. At the bottom sat a rectangular metal box darkened by age. It was too deliberate to be forgotten fishing equipment. Emily lowered herself far enough to reach it and dragged it upward. The box was heavier than she expected and sealed with a small brass lock. She stared at it for several seconds before remembering the key in her coat pocket. Boathouse lower. Her hands were steady this time as she inserted it. The key turned. The lock opened. Daniel had wanted someone with that key to reach this box. Emily carried it into the cabin before opening it. She placed it on the kitchen table beside Daniel's estate folder while Scout sat at her feet. The lid resisted at first, its rubber seal stiff from years of cold. Emily worked her fingers beneath the edge and pulled. The seal released with a soft crack. Inside were bundles of papers protected in plastic, several envelopes, and a thicker packet underneath. No money. No valuables she could see, just documents someone had gone to considerable trouble to hide. Emily lifted the envelope on top. Its paper had yellowed around the edges, but the handwriting remained clear. Her breath caught before she even read the names. The envelope was addressed to Daniel Carter. In the upper left corner, beneath an old Minnesota postmark, was the sender, Laura Bennett. Emily stared at her mother's name. Emily did not open the envelope immediately. For several seconds, she simply held it above the kitchen table, staring at the name, Laura Bennett, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. Scout rested his chin on her knee. Outside, wind moved loose snow across the porch. But inside the cabin, the only sound was the propane heater cycling on and off. Emily had imagined her mother's name thousands of times over the years, usually attached to questions she had learned not to ask. Where did she go? Why didn't she come back? Did she ever wonder what happened to me? Daniel's answer had always been some version of the same sentence. Your mother made her choice. Emily slid one finger beneath the envelope flap. The paper had already been opened once. Inside was a folded letter dated nearly 24 years earlier. Daniel, I know you're angry with me, but please tell Emily I called. I don't want her thinking I forgot her. Emily stopped reading. Her chest tightened so quickly she had to set the page down. She looked at the metal box again. Beneath the first letter were more envelopes, dozens of them, some neatly tied together with fading string. She pulled out the next bundle. Several were addressed directly to Daniel, others carried only 2 words across the front. For Emily. Her hands began to shake. She chose one at random. The date was 3 weeks after her 9th birthday. Sweetheart, I don't know if your dad will give you this, but I'm writing anyway. Happy birthday, my beautiful girl. I keep wondering whether the red coat still fits you, and whether you still sleep with that stuffed rabbit tucked under your chin. Do thunderstorms still scare you? Or have you decided you're too old for that now? Emily pressed the page flat against the table. The red coat. She remembered it vividly because she had hated the scratchy wool collar. And the rabbit, Mr. Hops. One ear had been sewn back on twice. She had slept with it until she was nearly 11. Those were not details a woman inventing concern from a distance would know. They belonged to someone who had been there, someone who had watched her sleep. Emily read the next lines twice. I'm trying to get stronger. I know that probably doesn't mean much to a 9-year-old, I just need you to know I love you every single day, even on the days I'm not allowed to see you." Emily stood so abruptly the chair scraped the floor. Scout lifted his head. "Not allowed," she said aloud. The room offered no answer. She paced once to the window and back. Her first instinct was anger at Laura. Maybe this was manipulation. Maybe her mother had written dramatic letters after leaving and never done anything beyond that. But there were too many envelopes. Emily counted quickly. 15 in the first bundle, 11 in another. Several more loose beneath them. Different dates, different postmarks, months stretched into years. She opened another. "Daniel, please stop returning my calls through your attorney. I am not asking to take her away from you. I am asking to speak to my daughter." Another. "Please tell me whether she received the Christmas package." Another. "I know you think waiting is better for her, but silence is becoming its own kind of answer." Emily sat again. Slower this time. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. Every letter changed the shape of something she had believed for most of her life. She had not thought of Daniel as a liar. Difficult, yes. Proud, certainly. He shut down during emotional conversations and treated apology like a language he had never learned. But he had also taught her to drive on icy roads and mailed her $20 in every birthday card until she turned 30. She had believed that whatever else he failed at, he had told her the truth about the central fact of her childhood. Laura left, Daniel stayed. That division had been simple enough to build a life around. Emily picked up another letter addressed to herself and forced herself to continue. This one was stained along one edge. The ink had feathered where moisture had reached it. Several lines were unreadable. She tried to separate the page from another sheet stuck behind it, but the paper resisted. No. She stopped immediately. If she tore them now, she might destroy the only record she had. The box had protected most of the contents, but not perfectly. Some envelopes were brittle, others showed faint mildew stains. Emily found plastic sleeves in Daniel's old desk and began placing the most fragile pages inside without unfolding them further. Practical work helped. She could not solve 24 years in one morning, but she could keep the paper from getting worse. When her phone showed enough signal, she called Vanessa. The call rang several times. "Emily?" Vanessa sounded irritated before Emily spoke. "Did you know about letters from Laura Silence?" "What letters?" "Letters my mother sent Dad? A lot of them. I have no idea what you're talking about. They were hidden under the boathouse." Vanessa exhaled sharply. "Of course they were. What does that mean?" "It means Daniel kept things, papers, receipts, old tools, things nobody else would see a reason to save." "These aren't receipts." Emily heard her own voice rising. "Some are addressed to me. I didn't know about them. You lived with him for years, and that made me responsible for every envelope he ever hid?" Emily closed her eyes. "Did he ever talk about Laura?" "Not with me. Never. Almost never. And when he did, it was clear the subject was complicated." "Complicated how?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "Emily, I married your father years after your mother was gone. Whatever happened between them happened before me." Emily wanted to push harder, but something in Vanessa's answer felt less evasive than tired. "You really didn't know?" "No." "Would you tell me if you did?" Another pause. "You may not like me, Emily, but I'm not going to invent a dead man's secrets just because you're angry." The line went silent between them. Emily looked at Scout. "I'm not angry at you." Vanessa gave a humorless little laugh. "That would be new." Then her tone softened by a degree. "Be careful with whatever you found. Your father had reasons for keeping things, even when I didn't understand them." "That's not much of an answer." It's the only one I have. The call ended. Emily sat with the phone in her hand until the screen went dark. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, her anger no longer had a clear place to land. She returned to the metal box. Beneath the bundles of letters lay a thick plastic packet. Inside was a photocopy of an old property document. Emily unfolded it carefully. The legal description referred to land along the northern shore of Lake Alder. Her eyes moved down the page until they reached the owner's name. Laura Bennett. Emily read it again. Then she searched for Daniel's name. It appeared nowhere on the ownership line. She checked the signature area, then the following page. No transfer to Daniel, no sale. No indication Laura had surrendered the property. Emily stood and crossed to the estate folder the attorney had given her. She pulled out the survey map, the tax records, every copied document connected to the cabin. Daniel had paid expenses. Daniel had arranged repairs. Daniel had behaved like the owner for decades. But the document in her hand said something else entirely. The cabin had belonged to Laura before she disappeared from Emily's life. Emily lowered herself into the chair. Scout pressed against her leg. "So what happened?" she whispered. "If Laura owned the cabin, why had Daniel kept using it? Why had he hidden her letters there? And why had Emily spent 24 years believing her mother had walked away from everything?" She looked down at the deed one last time. There was still no signature showing Laura Bennett had ever sold the property. By late morning, the county road had been cleared enough for Emily to drive back toward Pine Hollow. She packed the metal box carefully into the rear footwell, wrapped the letters in a dry towel, and made Scout lie beside them as if he could somehow guard 24 years of unanswered questions. The storm had left the world blindingly white. Plow ridges rose on both sides of the road, and every few miles Emily slowed for drifting snow. Ben followed in his truck until they reached the main highway. At the first stop sign, he pulled alongside and lowered his window. "You sure you want to do this today? If I wait, I'll just sit at the cabin reading the same 5 letters over and over." "Fair point." He glanced toward the box in her car. "County records first." Emily nodded. "I need to know whether that deed means what I think it means. Then I'll meet you there." Emily almost told him he did not need to come. She had spent most of her adult life treating help as something that created debt. But after the frozen lake, and after waking to a mother's letters she had never known existed, having another person nearby felt less like weakness than it had. "Okay," she said. The county administration building was smaller than Emily remembered. A low brick structure near the edge of town with salt crusted around the entrance. Inside, the records office smelled of paper, radiator heat, and old carpet. A handwritten sign directed property inquiries to a counter at the back. The woman who appeared behind it wore silver hair in a loose braid and reading glasses on a chain. "Can I help you?" Emily placed a copy of the Lake Alder document on the counter. "I'm trying to verify the ownership history on a cabin." The woman glanced at the legal description. Then her eyes stopped on the name. Laura Bennett. Emily felt something shift inside her. "You know her?" The woman looked up. "I knew of her. Years ago, she offered a hand. Margaret Olson. Maggie. I worked in this office before half of these records were on computers." Ben stepped closer. "That sounds useful." Maggie gave him a dry look. "It mostly means I'm old enough to remember where people put things when computers failed." Emily pushed the paper gently forward. "This says Laura owned the property. My father used the cabin for decades, but his estate file doesn't have a deed in his name." Maggie studied the copy more closely. "You're Daniel Carter's daughter." It was not a question. "Yes." Maggie's expression softened, though not enough to feel like pity. "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you." Emily hesitated. Did you know my mother? Not well. Maggie folded her hands on the counter. She came through this office a few times. Your grandfather's property was transferred to her after he died. Do you remember her leaving? I remember people talking. Emily's jaw tightened. What did they say? Maggie looked at Ben, then back at Emily. Small towns say too much when they know too little. I've had enough of people deciding what I should know. The words came sharper than Emily intended. Maggie did not recoil. Fair enough. She lowered her voice. I don't remember Laura as a woman who was eager to abandon anything. I remember her as frightened, and not well. Emily stared at her. Not well how Maggie shook her head. That's not my story to tell, and I don't know enough to tell it accurately. I only remember that she looked like someone carrying more than she could handle. The answer unsettled Emily more than a simple accusation would have. She had arrived hoping for something clean proof that Daniel had owned the cabin, or proof that Laura had signed it away. Instead, even Maggie's memory refused to fit the story Emily had lived with. Maggie led them to a terminal and began searching the parcel number. The modern database showed tax activity, assessments, and maintenance references. But the ownership trail stopped before the period Emily needed. Older files weren't all digitized, Maggie said, especially corrective filings and attachments. So where are they? Archive room. Ben looked toward a locked door behind the counter. Please tell me archive room means shelves, boxes, dust, and poor decisions made by clerks in the 90s. Maggie disappeared through the door. Emily sat on a wooden bench with the photocopy in her lap. Scout had remained in the car. And for the first time since morning, she had nothing practical to do. Ben sat beside her. You okay? No. Reasonable. Emily looked at him. You're not very good at comforting people. I'm excellent at not lying to them. That almost made her smile. Did my dad ever talk about Laura to you? No, not once. Daniel didn't talk much about anything personal. Ben rested his forearms on his knees. He talked about docks, engines, weather, sometimes fish. That sounds like him. He could spend 40 minutes explaining why somebody installed a hinge wrong and still avoid telling you how he felt about anything. Emily looked down at the deed. Apparently, he could avoid a lot more than feelings. Maggie returned, carrying a gray archival box. She placed it on a side table and began sorting folders by parcel number. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Emily helped where she could, reading legal descriptions and dates while Ben checked index cards against the computer. The process was slow because several documents referred to older parcel divisions and handwritten book numbers. At last, Maggie pulled out a thin folder and laid 3 documents side by side. Here. The first showed the original transfer from Laura's father's estate. The second was a later property description correction. The third confirmed Laura Bennett as recorded owner. Emily checked the signature line. There's nothing after this. Nothing transferring ownership away from her. Maggie searched again. No recorded sale to Daniel Carter. No quitclaim deed. No transfer through divorce that I can see. Then Dad never owned it, legally, based on this chain. Not as recorded owner. Emily leaned back. The room seemed strangely quiet. For years, Daniel had repaired the roof, paid tax bills, replaced dock boards, and acted as if Lake Alder belonged to him. Why were the bills in his name? Anyone can pay expenses associated with a property, Maggie said. That doesn't necessarily convey title. She tapped another sheet. Here's something else. It was a filing from several years before Daniel's death. Daniel had submitted a request for clarification and correction related to the ownership record. The filing had never been completed. He knew, Emily said. Maggie nodded slowly. This indicates he was trying to address the problem. How long ago? Maggie pointed to the date. A few years. Emily felt anger rise again, hot and immediate. Daniel had known. He had known while Emily still visited him for Christmas. He had known while he sat across from her at diners and asked about work. He had known while telling her nothing. Ben broke the silence. Could there be more? Maggie turned back to the archive box. Possibly. She searched another folder, then pulled out an old contact sheet attached to one of the filings. Daniel listed a previous owner contact reference here. Emily moved closer. The name was Laura Bennett. Beneath it was an address. That has to be old. Maggie checked the filing date, then shook her head. No. This contact information was updated when Daniel submitted the correction request. Emily stared at the page. Updated when Maggie pointed again. 6 years ago. The words seemed to take several seconds to reach her. 6 years ago. Emily had been 26. She had still believed her mother had vanished into some unknowable life decades earlier. She had never considered that Laura might have remained reachable enough for an address to sit inside a county file. Is this current? Emily asked. I can't promise that. 6 years is a long time. But someone updated it, yes. Maggie met her eyes. Someone did. Emily looked down at Laura Bennett's name and the address written beneath it, for the first time. The question was no longer only what had happened 24 years ago. It was whether the woman Emily had spent most of her life believing was gone might still be somewhere close enough to find. Emily carried the updated address back to the cabin in her coat pocket, folded twice as if making it smaller could make it less dangerous. She did not drive to it. She did not call anyone connected to it. Instead, she returned to Lake Alder with Scout and the metal box, because the cabin had become the only place where the pieces seemed willing to exist in the same room. By evening, the sky had cleared enough for moonlight to reflect off the frozen lake. Emily sat at the kitchen table with the letters arranged by date. She had begun making 2 columns on a legal pad. What I remember, what the letters say. The first column was disturbingly short. Her mother leaving. Daniel saying Laura had made her choice. A few missed Christmases. A birthday when Emily stopped asking whether a card had come. The second column kept growing. Letters, calls mentioned in letters, packages, requests for visits, apologies, pleas for patience. Emily leaned back and pressed both hands over her face. What if I remembered it wrong? Scout lifted his head from beside the heater. No, that's not right. She lowered her hands. I remembered what I was given. That distinction hurt almost as much when she was 8. Daniel had never sat her down and said, "Your mother doesn't love you." He had not needed to. He had said, "Your mother made her choice." Later, when Emily asked why Laura was not coming to school events, he said, "Some people aren't ready to be parents." When she asked whether Laura might come back, Daniel had looked exhausted and said, "We have to move forward." Emily had built the rest herself. Children did that. They turned vague adult silence into clear personal verdicts. Mom left because she wanted another life. Dad stayed because he chose me. For years, that simple division had made Daniel the safe parent, even when he became difficult in other ways. Now the letters sat in front of her like witnesses. The next morning, Emily drove into Pine Hollow and went to Daniel and Vanessa's house. Vanessa answered in a navy sweater, surprise hardening into caution when she saw Emily. "What now?" "I need to ask you about Dad." Vanessa looked past her toward the street. "You always did prefer questions after it was too late for him to answer." Emily flinched. "Maybe I learned that from him." The words landed harder than she intended. Vanessa stepped aside. "Come in." The house still smelled like Daniel's coffee, despite the fact he had been dead for more than a week. His boots were gone from beside the back door, but the rectangular outline where they had sat remained in the rug. Emily hated that small absence. Vanessa led her into the kitchen. "What did you find?" Emily placed copies of several letters on the table. "Enough to know Laura kept trying to reach me." Vanessa scanned the first page without touching it. "I told you I didn't know about these. Did Dad ever say why he thought she left?" "Not in detail. Did he ever say she was dangerous? That she didn't want me? Anything?" Vanessa's mouth tightened. Daniel did not like talking about the past. "That's not an answer. It is the answer." Emily stood with both palms against the table. "Vanessa, I spent most of my life believing my mother walked away because she didn't want me. Now I have letters where she's asking to see me. If you know anything, even something small, tell me." For the first time, Vanessa's expression shifted from defensiveness to something closer to fatigue. She sat. There were nights he couldn't sleep. Emily waited. "Years ago," Vanessa continued, "he would come downstairs at 2 or 3 in the morning and sit in the dark, usually around your birthday, sometimes Christmas." "Did he say why?" "Once." Vanessa looked toward the window. "He'd been drinking. Not much, but enough to talk more than usual," he said. "I kept Emily. I'm not sure anymore that means I won." Emily went still. The sentence sounded exactly like Daniel compressed. Indirect, saying more by accident than he ever would on purpose. "When was this? Maybe 10 years ago, maybe 12. And you didn't ask what he meant?" "I did. He told me to forget it." Vanessa gave a bitter little smile. "Your father was very good at ending conversations." Emily stared at the copies of Laura's letters. "Did you ever meet her?" "No." "Did he ever try to find her?" Vanessa hesitated. That hesitation was enough. "What?" Emily asked. "There was a box in the hall closet. Daniel said it was old paperwork. I almost threw it out after the funeral." She stood and walked toward the hallway. "I kept it because he got angry once when I moved it." Emily followed. Vanessa pulled a dented cardboard box from the bottom of a closet. It contained receipts, insurance forms, repair invoices, and old envelopes. Nothing looked important. Emily began sorting carefully. Halfway down, she found a printed invoice from a private locating service in Duluth. Client, Daniel Carter. Subject, Search Laura Bennett. Emily read the date. 7 years earlier. He was looking for her. Vanessa folded her arms. "Apparently." "You knew about this?" "No. I knew he kept paperwork. I did not read every page of his life." Emily looked up. "I'm not accusing you. You have been accusing me since the funeral, because he left you everything." "He left me what was his." The correction came sharply. Both women heard it. Emily looked away first. Vanessa exhaled. "I'm sorry. No, you're right." Emily held the invoice. "The cabin wasn't his." Vanessa said nothing. On the drive back to Lake Alder, Emily kept thinking about Daniel paying someone to find Laura. That did not erase the letters he had hidden. If anything, it made the silence worse. He had known enough to search. He had known enough to submit property corrections. He had known enough to feel guilty, yet he had never told Emily. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up again. Emily fed Scout, checked the heater, then returned to the box. She found a separate bundle she had not yet read closely. These letters were not from Laura. The handwriting was Daniel's. Most were drafts, some incomplete, none mailed. One began with Laura's name and then crossed it out. Another contained only 3 paragraphs before stopping. Emily read them in order. Daniel's voice was painfully familiar, restrained, factual, almost formal, even when writing about things that should have broken him open. I thought keeping her with me was the safest thing. I told myself stability mattered more than anything else. Another draft ended with, "There was always another reason to wait." Emily felt anger rise until she had to stand and walk away from the table. "Another reason," she said to the empty room. For 24 years, Scout followed her into the living area. She bent and rested one hand on his back. He could find people, he could file paperwork, he could hide letters, but he couldn't talk to me. Later, after dark, Emily returned to the final draft in the bundle. It was written only months before Daniel died. The paper had been folded but never placed in an envelope. "Laura, I don't know if you will believe this after all this time. Emily still thinks you left because you wanted to." Emily stopped breathing for a second. The next line was shorter. "That is my fault." Emily read Daniel's sentence until the words lost their shape. That is my fault. She wanted more, an explanation, a defense, something that would make the sentence less devastating. Instead, the draft continued in fragments. "I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself you were unstable and that contact would confuse her. Some of that was true at the time. Not all of it." Emily's grip tightened around the page. Scout lifted his head from the rug. She forced herself to keep reading. "After you left for treatment, I said temporary because that was easier than saying I was afraid. When you asked for more time with her, I delayed. When you called, sometimes I didn't answer. When you wrote, I kept the letters. I thought if enough time passed, Emily would stop asking. She did." Emily pushed back from the table so hard the chair struck the wall. The sound startled Scout to his feet. "No." She paced into the living room, then back. The heater hummed. Snow pressed against the windows in pale drifts. Daniel's handwriting remained on the table. Calm and narrow, describing the destruction of 2 lives as if documenting a repair invoice. Emily picked up another draft. This one was older. "Laura, you were not well. I was angry. I was scared every time you said you wanted Emily back with you. I convinced myself that if I let you in, I would lose her. So I made every decision as if fear were the same thing as judgment." Emily stopped. The sentence hit differently because she remembered being 8, her mother crying in the kitchen, Daniel standing with both hands on the counter. Emily had heard only pieces through the hallway. "You need help. I need time. She's staying with me until now." Emily had always interpreted that memory as the beginning of abandonment. Now it looked like the beginning of something else. Laura had been in crisis. Daniel had taken control. What was supposed to be temporary had hardened into years. Emily opened one of Laura's letters from the same period. "Daniel, I know I scared you. I know I was not myself. I am doing what the doctors asked. I am taking the medication. I am staying with my sister until I am stable. Please let me speak to her. I am not asking to take her tomorrow. I am asking not to disappear from her life." Emily lowered the page. That distinction mattered. Laura had not been asking to reclaim Emily overnight. She had been asking to remain her mother. Daniel had decided even that was too dangerous. Another letter, months later, was angrier. "You keep saying she needs stability. I agree, but stability does not mean pretending I am dead." Emily closed her eyes. Anger rose so quickly it frightened her. She gathered Daniel's drafts in one hand, crossed to the wood stove, and opened the iron door. Heat rolled against her face. One movement, and she could reduce the pages to ash. For a few seconds, she imagined doing it. Let Daniel's words vanish the way he had let Laura's. Let there be one less archive of decisions nobody had been brave enough to say aloud. Scout nudged her leg. Emily looked down. The papers trembled in her hand. He kept hers. She whispered, I'm keeping his. She closed the stove and returned to the table. By morning, the temperature had dropped sharply. The radio warned of another cold front moving across northern Minnesota, with wind chills dangerous enough to cause frostbite quickly. Emily checked the propane gauge twice. The roads were passable for now, but Ben arrived before noon in his truck and told her conditions would worsen overnight. You should think about getting back to town, he said. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what the weather is doing. Emily stood on the porch with her arms folded against the cold. I need another day for the letters. She nodded. Ben looked past her toward the cabin. Then have another day. Just don't turn it into 3 because you're angry. Emily almost snapped at him, then stopped. I am angry. I know. He kept them from me. Ben said nothing. That was becoming one of the things Emily trusted about him. He did not rush to make pain more comfortable than it was. He knew she was sick. Emily continued. And he still decided that meant she shouldn't get to be my mother? Sounds like he decided fear gave him the right to control the outcome. Emily looked at him. That's exactly what he did. Doesn't mean he didn't think he was protecting you. That doesn't make it better. I didn't say it did. The answer loosened something in her chest. Ben came inside long enough to help move several fragile letters into plastic sleeves. He handled them carefully, touching only the edges. You don't have to read all of these today, he said. I know. She kept reading. Near the bottom of the box, Emily found a letter from Laura dated almost 2 years after she had left Minnesota. The paper was creased heavily, as if Daniel had opened it more than once. I am tired of begging you. Daniel, I am also tired of hating you. I don't know what Emily has been told. I don't know whether she thinks I forgot her. Maybe one day she will decide she wants nothing to do with me. If that day comes, I will live with it. But that choice should be hers. A second paragraph followed. If she ever wants me, the lake will always know where I belong. Dad left that cabin to me because he believed everyone needed one place they could return to. I used to think that place would be ours. Emily read the lines twice. The lake, the cabin. Laura had still thought of it as hers. That matched the deed. Ben glanced at her. Something, Emily handed him the page. He read silently, so she knew the cabin was still in her name. Looks like it. And Daniel kept using it. Yes. Emily gathered the deed packet and searched through the attachments Maggie had helped identify. A name caught her attention near the bottom of an old correspondence record, the law office that had represented Laura during the property transfer from her father's estate. Emily called Maggie before she could talk herself out of it. Maggie answered from the records office. That firm closed years ago, she said after Emily gave the name. But one of the attorneys merged into another practice. I can look. Emily waited while papers shuffled on the other end. Here. Same records custodian, different office name. They're still operating. Maggie gave her the number. Emily wrote it down. Ben stood near the window. You calling? I don't know. That means yes. Eventually, Emily gave him a tired look. Very helpful. I try. She called. A receptionist transferred her twice. Emily explained that she was trying to locate Laura Bennett regarding an old property file. There was a long pause while the woman checked archived records. I can't give you private contact information, the woman finally said. I understand. Emily stared at Laura's letter. I just need to know whether the file is active, whether she's... The word caught. Alive. She could not quite say it. The woman seemed to understand anyway. Hold, please. Emily listened to faint office music while Scout lay across her boots. Ben remained silent. When the woman returned, her voice was gentler. Miss Carter? Yes, I can confirm one thing. Emily gripped the phone. What? Miss Bennett is alive. Emily kept the phone in her hand after the call ended. Miss Bennet is alive. 4 words. That was all. No address, no voice, no explanation. Yet they changed the room. Until that moment, Laura had existed as handwriting, memory, and absence. Now she existed somewhere in the same world, breathing, waking up in the morning, possibly drinking coffee, probably thinking about a daughter who had spent 24 years believing she had been abandoned. Ben stood near the window and watched Emily carefully. "You all right now? Do you want me to leave?" Emily looked at the phone. "No." It surprised her how quickly she answered. Scout had curled against her boots, warm and heavy, as if he had decided she should not move too far. Emily called the law office back before Courage could disappear. This time she asked whether they could forward a message to Laura instead of releasing private information. The receptionist agreed. Emily gave her name and number. Then came the harder part. "What should I say?" she asked. Though she was not asking the receptionist, Ben remained silent. Emily closed her eyes. "Tell her Emily Carter called. Tell her I found the Lake Alder papers," she stopped, "and tell her I want to talk." The message was sent. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Emily hated waiting. She reorganized the letters, checked the heater, fed Scout too early, wiped a kitchen counter that was already clean. Every few minutes she looked at her phone. By late afternoon, she had convinced herself Laura would not call. By evening, she had convinced herself that maybe this was better. A living mother who chose not to answer would at least be a clear answer. The phone rang at 7:14. Unknown number. Emily stared at it until the third ring. Ben, who had been sitting by the stove repairing a torn glove, looked up. "Emily," she answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a woman's voice, older than the one in Emily's memories, said, "Emily?" Her knees weakened. She sat. "Yes." Another silence followed, and in it, Emily heard breathing that sounded unsteady. "It's Laura." Emily almost laughed from the absurdity of needing the introduction. "I know." The woman inhaled sharply. "I didn't know if you would ever call." Anger rose before Emily could stop it. "You had my entire childhood to call me." Silence again. "I did call." Not enough. The answer came too fast, too sharp. Ben looked down at his glove. Giving Emily what privacy he could without leaving, Laura did not argue. "You're right." That made Emily angrier. "Don't agree with me just because you think that's what I want. I'm not." Laura's voice trembled. "I'm agreeing because there were years I should have tried harder." Emily gripped the edge of the table. "Dad kept your letters. I know some of them never reached you. Some, there are dozens." Laura breathed out slowly. "Then he kept more than I knew. Why didn't you come get me?" The question had lived in Emily since she was 8. Saying it at 32 did not make it sound less like a child's question. Laura took several seconds to answer. "Because when I left, I was not well enough to take care of you safely. Your father was right about that part." Emily said nothing. "I was sick," Laura continued. "Sicker than I wanted anyone to know. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating properly. I was frightened all the time." Then numb. Then frightened again. "There were days I could barely get dressed. I agreed that you should stay with Daniel while I got treatment because I thought it would be temporary, and then your father decided temporary should last longer." Emily closed her eyes. "The letters say he blocked you, sometimes. Not always. At first he answered. Then he stopped taking calls. He said you needed routine. That hearing from me upset you. I don't remember talking to you. That's because most of the time I didn't get through." Emily felt heat behind her eyes. "So why didn't you fight?" Laura's answer was quiet. "I did. For a while. For a while, yes. That's not the same thing as 24 years, no. Laura's voice broke slightly. It isn't. Emily looked toward the window. The frozen lake reflected the porch light in a pale strip. Scout pressed closer to her shin. Laura continued before Emily could speak. I got treatment. I stayed with my sister. I tried to stabilize. I wrote. I called. I asked for visits. I spoke to an attorney. I was told I could fight. But I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, Daniel would use my medical history to keep me away permanently. So you gave up? Not all at once. There was no self-defense in Laura's tone. Only exhaustion. That would almost be easier to explain. I gave up a little at a time. Then years passed. Then I was ashamed of how much time had passed. Then I told myself you were probably happy and that showing up again would only hurt you. Emily let out a bitter laugh. You both decided what was best for me without asking me. Yes. The directness silenced her. Laura whispered, and I am sorry. Emily stared at the letters spread across the table. Did you love me? Ben's hands stopped moving. Laura made a sound that might have been a sob. Every day. That's not the same as being there, I know. Emily wiped her cheek angrily. I found the deed. Laura went quiet. The cabin, Lake Alder. It has your name on it. It should. Dad used that place for decades, I know. He paid everything, I know. Then why was it still yours? Laura's voice became steadier, as though the property question was easier than the daughter question. Your grandfather left it to me. He loved that lake. When he died, he made sure the cabin stayed in the family. I never transferred it to Daniel. Not during the divorce, no. Never signed it over, never. Emily looked at the photocopy beside her. Then Dad knew. Eventually. What does that mean? For a long time, Daniel behaved as if managing it made it his. I didn't have the strength to fight over a cabin when I was already fighting to stay functional. But you kept ownership. Yes. Emily stood and walked to the window. Why, Laura took a breath. Because that cabin was the last place I remembered us being happy before everything went wrong. Emily shut her eyes. She saw the pencil mark by the kitchen doorway. EM 8.1. The crooked star in Laura's handwriting. I found where you measured me. Laura made another broken sound. The doorway. Yes. You wore a red coat that winter. Emily's throat tightened. I know. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The call no longer felt like an interrogation. But it did not feel like a reunion either. It felt like standing on opposite sides of a river neither knew how to cross. Laura finally said, I don't expect you to forgive me because I answered the phone. Good. I mean that. I don't know what I'm supposed to call you. Laura is fine. Emily appreciated that more than she wanted to admit. Did Dad ever find you? Another silence. This one felt different. Yes. Turned away from the window. Her pulse jumped. He contacted you? He called me. Why? Laura's breathing changed again. He said he'd been trying to fix the Lake Alder records. He said he was tired of carrying what happened. Emily gripped the phone tighter. What exactly did he tell you? He apologized for keeping the letters. For more than that. Emily felt anger and grief collide in her chest. Did he tell you he was going to tell me? Laura was silent long enough that Emily already knew the answer mattered. Then she said, Yes. Emily sat slowly. Ben looked up. Laura's voice came through the phone, quiet but clear. Your father called me last spring. She paused. He told me he was finally going to tell you everything. Emily met Laura 2 days later in a small cafe outside Pine Hollow, because neither of them was ready for their first meeting in 24 years to happen inside the cabin. Emily arrived early and chose a table near the window. Scout stayed in the car with the heater running. Visible from where she sat, She had imagined this moment too many times during the drive. In some versions, she cried immediately. In others, she accused Laura of everything before the woman could sit down. In reality, when Laura entered, Emily simply knew her. The hair was grayer, the face was thinner, but the shape of her eyes was familiar in a way that made Emily's stomach tighten. Laura stopped 3 steps inside the door. Neither moved for several seconds. "Hi," Laura said. Emily stood. "Hi." They did not hug. Laura seemed grateful that Emily did not have to refuse one. She sat across from her and placed both hands around a coffee cup she had not yet touched. Up close, Emily could see nervousness in the small tremor of her fingers. It did not make the last 24 years disappear, but it made Laura look less like an idea and more like a person. "You look like Daniel around the eyes," Laura said. Emily almost laughed. "That's a dangerous opening." Laura gave a faint, sad smile. "You're right. Sorry." Silence settled between them. Emily studied her mother's face and tried to connect it with the woman who had written about redcoats and stuffed rabbits. "Tell me about the call," she said. Laura nodded. "Daniel called me last spring. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number." "What did he say?" "At first, practical things, the cabin, the deed, county records. He said he had been trying to correct the property file." "Why then?" "He said he was getting older and was tired of pretending unfinished things would finish themselves." That sounded enough like Daniel that Emily looked away. Laura continued. "Then he apologized." "For what?" "For keeping you from me when you were little, for telling himself that because I was sick, he was entitled to decide everything, for letting temporary become permanent." Emily's jaw tightened. "Did he admit he kept the letters?" "Yes, all of them. He didn't say how many. There were enough. I believe you." Emily leaned back. "And what did you say?" Laura stared into her coffee. "I told him an apology did not give me back those years." Emily felt something inside her soften. Not toward Daniel, but toward the fact that Laura had not made his regret easy. What did he say to that? "He said he knew. That's it, mostly." Laura looked up. "Your father was never good at saying the thing underneath the thing, no. But he did say one thing clearly. He said Emily still believes you left because you wanted to, and that is my fault." Emily had read the same sentence in Daniel's draft. Hearing it spoken aloud made it feel final. He wrote that too. Laura closed her eyes briefly. Then maybe he was trying to say it somewhere. Not to me. No. Emily hated the anger that came with that answer because it had nowhere useful to go. Daniel was dead. There would be no confrontation. No chance to ask whether fear had really seemed worth 24 years. No chance to hear an excuse and reject it. Did he say why he never told me? He said every year made it harder. At first he thought he was protecting you. Then he knew he had done something wrong. Then he was afraid that telling you would cost him your trust. Emily gave a short, bitter laugh. So he protected my trust by lying longer? Yes. Laura did not defend him. And he knew that by the end. Emily looked out the window. I keep wanting there to be some reason that changes what he did. There probably isn't one. You loved him once. I did. Laura folded her hands. And he loved you. Both can be true without making what he did right. That sentence stayed between them. Emily had spent most of her life dividing people into those who stayed and those who left. Daniel had stayed, therefore he was safe. Laura had left, therefore she was guilty. The truth was uglier and less convenient. Daniel had stayed and still caused harm. Laura had left and still loved her. What about the box? Emily asked. Did he tell you why he hid everything under the boathouse? He said if he lost his nerve, he wanted the papers somewhere you could eventually find them. Eventually? He believed you might come back to Lake Alder after he died. Emily stared at her. That's why he left the key. I think so. So the box was his backup confession. Laura nodded slowly. That sounds like Daniel. Emily almost laughed again, but tears came instead. She wiped them before they fell. He could plan a confession better than he could actually confess. Laura's eyes filled too. Yes. Later that afternoon, Emily took Laura to the county office. Maggie had prepared copies of the chain of title and Daniel's incomplete correction filing. Laura supplied identification and several old documents she had kept from her father's estate. The pieces aligned. There was no hidden transfer, no missing sale. The Lake Alder cabin had remained legally tied to Laura Bennett. Daniel had maintained it, paid expenses, and tried late in life to correct the record. But he had never become recorded owner. Emily looked at Maggie. So Vanessa never owned it either. Not through Daniel. Maggie said, whatever rights she thought she was releasing for that $100 were effectively tied to the estate's uncertain claim, not ownership of Laura's property. Emily thought about Vanessa's words. He left me what was his. For the first time, they sounded less defensive and more literal. Emily called Vanessa from outside the building. The cabin belongs to Laura, she said. Vanessa was quiet. I suspected that might be where this was going. You really didn't know? No. Emily stared across the snowy parking lot. I blamed you for a lot of things. You had reasons, not all of them good. Vanessa exhaled. Neither of us needs to turn this into something sentimental. Emily almost smiled. Agreed. But I didn't take the cabin from you. I know. That was enough. They ended the call without warmth, but also without the old accusation. Emily returned to Lake Alder with Laura before sunset. Scout greeted Laura cautiously, then accepted her after one sniff and a scratch behind the ears. Inside, Laura stood at the kitchen doorway and touched the faded pencil mark, EM8. Her fingers rested beside the crooked star. I remember making that. Emily watched her. I remembered it too. Just not until I came back. Laura nodded. They walked to the table where the letters, deed copies, and Daniel's drafts were arranged. No one spoke for a while. Finally, Laura asked, What do you want to do with the cabin? Emily looked around the room. For days, she had thought of the place as the only thing Daniel had left within her reach. Now even that story was wrong. It isn't mine to decide. Laura reached into the folder she had brought from the county office and removed the original deed copy bearing her name. She placed it between them. Then maybe it's time I decide. Laura left the deed on the kitchen table between them. For a long moment, Emily did not touch it. What are you deciding? She asked. Laura ran one hand over the edge of the paper. That I don't want the cabin to spend another 24 years representing something we lost. Emily looked around the room. The weak winter light had turned the windows gray. Daniel's coffee pot remained beside the stove. Laura's crooked star was still visible on the doorway. The place seemed to contain all three of them at once. The mother who had owned it, the father who had treated it as his, and the daughter who had paid $100 for an estate claim that had never amounted to ownership. I thought Dad left me nothing, Emily said. Then I thought this was the one thing I managed to get anyway. It was never Daniel's to leave. I know. Laura looked toward the frozen lake. My father left it to me because he wanted me to have somewhere permanent after everything with Daniel. I couldn't come back here, but I couldn't give it away either. Why not? Laura's eyes returned to Emily. Because you were here. Emily swallowed. I wasn't. Your height was on that doorway. Your drawings were in the old desk.
I remembered you running down to the dock every morning before breakfast. Giving up the cabin felt like admitting those years were gone completely. Emily looked at the deed. And now you came back. Laura did not make the words grander than they needed to be. If you want it.
I want to transfer it to you properly. Emily stared at her. You don't owe me property. I know, and this doesn't fix anything. I know that too. Laura's calm answer mattered. There was no bargain hidden inside it, no request for forgiveness in exchange for land. Then why? Emily asked. Laura touched the deed once. Because it was meant to stay in the family. And because I'd rather give you something honestly than leave you wondering who it belongs to. The paperwork took time. Maggie helped them identify what had to be filed, and Laura signed the transfer documents required to place the Lake Alder property in Emily's name. There was no dramatic fortune attached to it. The cabin needed roof work, the boathouse needed repairs. The dock would require attention once the ice disappeared. Owning it would cost Emily money, not make her rich. But when the completed papers finally rested in front of her, Emily understood why the $100 no longer seemed foolish. She had paid Vanessa for whatever uncertain claim Daniel's estate might have had. That transaction had bought her almost nothing legally. What it had done was bring her back to Lake Alder, back to the doorway, back to the boathouse, back to Scout scratching at rotten boards until the past could no longer stay hidden. The real thing she had found was not property. It was evidence. Laura's letters proved that absence had not meant indifference. The deed proved the cabin's history. Daniel's drafts proved that he had known what he had done and, too late, had tried to face it. None of that gave Emily her childhood back. It did something smaller and perhaps more important. It gave her the truth about it. Emily did not suddenly forgive Daniel. Some mornings, she woke missing him so sharply that she reached for her phone before remembering he was dead. Other mornings, she read one of Laura's letters and became furious all over again. Love and anger refused to cancel each other out. Daniel had been the father who stayed. He had taught her to fish, driven through snow to pick her up from school, and called her 3 days before his death. He had also allowed fear to become control and control to become a lie that lasted most of her life. Emily learned to hold both truths without forcing either one to disappear. Laura did not become mom overnight either. At first, she remained Laura. They spoke by phone once, then again 3 days later. Their conversations were awkward. Sometimes they ran out of things to say. Sometimes Emily asked a question whose answer hurt. Laura answered anyway. They had lunch, then another. Eventually, they spent a weekend together at Lake Alder. Laura showed Emily where her grandfather used to clean fish behind the boathouse. Emily showed Laura the metal compartment Scout had uncovered. Neither pretended they were recovering 24 years in a few afternoons. They were simply creating days that had not existed before. Vanessa remained outside most of that rebuilding, which suited everyone. A few weeks after the title was settled, a box arrived at Emily's Minneapolis apartment. Inside were Daniel's remaining personal papers, an old flannel shirt, several photographs, and the silver watch Emily had seen on Vanessa's wrist after the funeral. There was no emotional letter, only a note in Vanessa's neat handwriting. Thought these should be with you. Emily held the watch for a long time before placing it beside Daniel's photographs. She called Vanessa and thanked her. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. It was enough. By spring, Lake Alder changed almost overnight. Snow withdrew into the trees. Dark water appeared along the shoreline, widening each day until the ice broke apart and disappeared. Emily drove north with Scout on a Saturday morning and found Ben already unloading lumber beside the boathouse. "You're late," he said.
It's 9:15.
Exactly. I own the place now. I can be late. Ben smiled. That sounds dangerous. Together, they replaced the rotten boards around the section Scout had broken through. Emily insisted the hidden compartment remain, though she no longer intended to hide anything inside it. Ben reinforced the supports and repaired the warped door. The work took most of the weekend. Laura arrived Sunday, carrying sandwiches and coffee. There was still an uncertain second whenever Emily saw her. A small adjustment between memory and reality. But the uncertainty no longer made her want to run. Late that afternoon, Emily and Laura sat on the repaired dock with their shoes beside them. Scout wandered near the boathouse while Ben packed his tools. The lake was cold and blue, moving gently against the pilings. Laura looked toward the cabin. "Your grandfather would be glad somebody is taking care of it." Emily smiled faintly. "Ask me again after I pay for the roof." A sudden scratching sound came from behind them. Emily turned. Scout. The dog was digging furiously beside the boathouse. Emily stood so fast, Laura laughed. "What? The last time he did that, my entire childhood changed." Emily hurried over. Scout plunged his nose into the shallow hole and pulled something from the dirt. Emily stopped. A faded green tennis ball hung from his mouth. Scout wagged his tail proudly. For 1 second, Emily simply stared. Then she laughed. Not politely, not carefully. She laughed until she had to put a hand against the boathouse wall. Laura began laughing too. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it?" Emily took the ball and threw it toward the cabin. Scout raced after it. For once, there was nothing underneath the boathouse waiting to rewrite anyone's life. Emily returned to the dock and sat beside Laura. Their shoulders did not quite touch. They did not need to. The distance between them was still real, but now it was measured in inches instead of years. And for the first time, it felt crossable. Emily looked back at the cabin she had once believed was the worthless remainder of her father's estate. Daniel had left Vanessa everything that belonged to him. The house, the truck, the savings, the possessions. But the one place Emily had fought to keep had never belonged to him at all. Beneath its old boathouse, Daniel had hidden the confession he had lacked the courage to give his daughter while he was alive. Scout had found the box. Emily had found the letters, and inside them, she had found something worth more than the cabin, more than an inheritance, and more than the $100 that brought her there. She had found the truth. The cabin had never been Daniel's to give away, and the life Emily built from that truth finally belonged to her.